Daniel Martinez sat in the corner booth of Rosie's diner, staring at a plate of Thanksgiving turkey that might as well have been cardboard. The gravy had started to congeal at the edges, forming a thin skin that reminded him of hospital food, and he couldn't bring himself to take another bite. Outside, the November wind rattled the windows, and inside, the diner was almost empty except for a few other souls who had nowhere better to be on a holiday that was supposed to be about family and gratitude. He had neither. 6 months ago, his daughter Emma had died in a hospice room that smelled like lavender and antiseptic, her small hand going limp in his after 2 years of fighting leukemia that had taken everything from her except her smile. She'd kept smiling almost until the end, telling him knock-knock jokes she'd made up that didn't make any sense, asking him to read her favorite book about a caterpillar that became a butterfly one more time. 3 months after Emma's funeral, his wife Lauren had packed her things and left, saying she couldn't look at him anymore without seeing their daughter's eyes staring back at her. The genetic test had shown Emma's leukemia came from his side of the family, and Lauren had never quite forgiven him for that, as if he'd chosen to pass down broken DNA. So here he was, 36 years old, eating Thanksgiving dinner alone in a diner, because going home to an empty house with Emma's bedroom still exactly as she'd left it felt worse than sitting in public with his grief. This booth had been Emma's favorite. She used to sit right where he was sitting now, her feet not quite touching the floor, stealing fries off his plate when she thought he wasn't looking. They'd come here every Thursday night for what Emma called their special dinner, just the two of them, and she'd always order the same thing: cheeseburger, extra pickles, fries, and a chocolate milkshake with 2 straws so they could share. The waitresses had known her by name. Old Rosie, who'd owned this place for 40 years, used to keep a jar of maraschino cherries behind the counter just for Emma because she loved putting them on top of her whipped cream. Now the booth felt too big, and Daniel felt too small sitting in it. He pushed his fork around his plate, not really seeing the food, just mechanically going through motions because that's what the last 6 months had been. Motions. Wake up. Go to work at the insurance office. Come home. Avoid Emma's room. Fall asleep on the couch watching whatever was on TV. Repeat. On Thursdays, add crying in a diner bathroom to the routine. He was doing exactly that, staring at congealed gravy and considering whether he had the energy to make it to the bathroom before the tears came, when a small voice broke through his thoughts. "Excuse me, mister." Daniel looked up and found himself staring at a little girl, maybe 8 years old, with tangled dark hair that looked like it hadn't been brushed in a few days. She was wearing a pink jacket that was too thin for November, and jeans with holes in the knees that didn't look fashionably distressed, just worn through. In her arms she clutched a stuffed rabbit that had seen better days, one ear hanging by a thread, its fur matted and gray. The girl's eyes were cautious but desperate, and Daniel recognized that look. Emma had worn it in the hospital when she was trying to be brave about something that terrified her. "My mom," the girl said, her voice small but determined. "Can she sit with you? All the other booths are taken." It was obviously a lie. The diner was nearly empty. Daniel could see at least 6 open booths from where he was sitting, but he followed the girl's gaze to the front of the diner, near the door, where a young woman sat hunched over, her head down, her shoulders curved inward like she was trying to take up as little space as possible. The woman was maybe mid-20s, wearing a jacket similar to the girl's, equally insufficient for the weather. She was thin, the kind of thin that spoke of missed meals rather than gym memberships, and even from across the diner, Daniel could see the shadows under her eyes. She wasn't looking at her daughter. She was staring at her hands, folded on the table in front of her, and Daniel realized she was embarrassed, ashamed even. His first instinct was to say no. To protect this booth, this space, this private memorial he'd built to his grief. To tell this little girl and her mother to find somewhere else to sit, because he wasn't ready to share Emma's favorite place with strangers. But something stopped him. Maybe it was the way the girl was trying so hard to be brave. Maybe it was the stuffed rabbit that reminded him of Mr. Skill, Whiskers, the toy elephant Emma had slept with every night until she died. Maybe it was just that he was so tired of saying no to everything, including his own life. He nodded slowly. The girl's face transformed. The caution melted into pure relief, and she smiled, a gap-toothed smile that made Daniel's chest ache. Then she turned and ran back to her mother, her worn sneakers squeaking on the linoleum. Daniel watched as the woman's head snapped up, saw her daughter pointing back at him, saw the conversation happening in whispered tones. The woman shook her head. The daughter insisted. Finally, reluctantly, the woman stood and walked toward his booth, her daughter's hand clutched tightly in hers. Up close, Daniel could see more details. The woman's jacket had a stain on the sleeve. Her jeans were clean but faded from too many washings. Her hair was pulled back in a ponytail that looked more functional than stylish. But her eyes, when she finally met his gaze, were kind despite the exhaustion. "I'm so sorry," she said quietly, her voice carrying an accent Daniel couldn't quite place. "Sophie shouldn't have bothered you. We can find somewhere else." "It's fine," Daniel heard himself say. "Sit." The woman hesitated, then slid into the booth across from him, pulling her daughter in beside her. The little girl, Sophie, immediately set her stuffed rabbit on the table like a third guest. "I'm Maya," the woman said, not quite meeting his eyes. "And this is Sophie. We won't stay long. We just needed to get warm for a bit." Daniel nodded, not sure what to say. Now that they were sitting across from him, he noticed other things. Neither of them had menus. Neither had ordered anything. They were sitting in a restaurant on Thanksgiving night without food, which meant they weren't here to eat. They were here because it was warm and public, and they had nowhere else to go. The realization hit him with uncomfortable clarity. They were homeless, or close to it. Sophie started chattering, nervous energy filling the silence. "This is Mr. Hoppers," she said, holding up the stuffed rabbit. "He's been with us on our whole adventure. Mom says adventures are when you're brave about stuff that's hard, and we've been really brave, haven't we, Mom?" Maya's hand moved to her daughter's shoulder, gently trying to quiet her. "Sophie, let the man eat his dinner." But Daniel wasn't eating his dinner. He hadn't been eating it before they arrived, and he certainly couldn't now. Not with this little girl trying so hard to make sleeping in a car sound like an adventure. "How long have you been on your adventure?" Daniel asked, looking at Sophie. Sophie's eyes lit up that someone was actually listening. A really long time. We sleep in our car sometimes, but Mom says it's like camping. And we go to the library a lot because they have bathrooms and it's warm and I can read books. I'm really good at reading. I'm in 3rd grade. "Sophie," Maya said again, her voice strained. "That's enough." But Sophie wasn't finished. "Mom says we're going to have our own place soon. A real one, with a kitchen and everything. She's looking for a job, and then we'll get an apartment, and I can have my own bed again, and maybe we can get a cat. I've always wanted a cat. Do you have a cat?" Daniel shook his head, his throat tight. "No, no cat." The waitress appeared then, saving him from having to continue. Old Rosie herself, who'd been working these tables since before Daniel was born, stood beside the booth with her order pad and a look in her eyes that told him she'd already sized up the situation. "Refill on your coffee, Danny?" she asked, using the nickname only she was allowed to use. If you're feeling this story so far, hit that like button and subscribe, because what Daniel does next will prove that sometimes strangers become family exactly when you need them most. Daniel looked at Rosie, then at Maya and Sophie, then at his plate of food he couldn't eat. He thought about Emma, about Thursday nights in this booth, about her smile when Rosie brought her a milkshake with extra cherries. He thought about what Emma would want him to do right now, sitting across from a little girl who was trying to be brave about things no child should have to be brave about. "Actually," Daniel said, his voice rougher than intended, "can you bring 3 cheeseburgers, extra pickles, fries, and 3 chocolate milkshakes? And make sure the milkshakes have extra cherries." Maya's eyes went wide. No, we can't. We're not." "It's Thanksgiving," Daniel interrupted quietly. "No one should be hungry on Thanksgiving." Sophie's face lit up like someone had turned on a light inside her. "Really? We can have burgers and milkshakes?" Maya's composure cracked, her eyes filled with tears that she blinked back rapidly, her hand trembling as she reached for her daughter. "We can't pay you back, not right now. I'm not asking you to." The words hung in the air between them, and Rosie made a small sound of approval before walking away to put in the order. Maya stared at Daniel like she was trying to figure out if this was real, if he was safe, if she could trust this moment. "Thank you," she finally whispered, so quietly he almost didn't hear it. They sat in awkward silence for a moment, and then Sophie, bless her, started talking again. She told him about Mr. Sparded, Hopper's adventures, about the books she'd read at the library, about how her mom was the best mom in the world and was going to make everything better soon. Maya tried to quiet her daughter periodically, but Daniel found himself asking questions, drawn into this child's determination to find joy in a situation that had no business containing any. The food arrived faster than usual. Rosie had probably put a rush on it, understanding in that way long-time waitresses do, that this meal mattered more than most. Sophie's eyes went wide at the sight of the burger and fries, and Maya's face did something complicated, cycling through gratitude and shame and relief so quickly Daniel had to look away. He watched as Maya cut Sophie's burger into smaller pieces, an automatic mother gesture that reminded him painfully of watching Lauren do the same thing for Emma. Sophie grabbed a fry and bit into it like it was the best thing she'd ever tasted. And maybe in that moment, it was. "Can you tell me what happened?" Daniel asked quietly, directing the question at Maya. "You don't have to, but sometimes it helps to tell someone." Maya was quiet for a long moment, watching her daughter eat. Then, slowly, she started talking. She'd left an abusive relationship 8 months ago, she said. Took Sophie and ran with nothing but what they could carry in 2 suitcases and some trash bags. She'd been working odd jobs, staying in shelters when beds were available, sleeping in her car when they weren't. She'd had a job lined up 2 weeks ago, a real one with benefits, at a medical office. She'd been ready to sign a lease on a small apartment. Then the job fell through, budget cuts or something. They'd been vague about it. The apartment went to someone else. She'd been living out of her car for 5 days now, trying to figure out her next move. "I make sure Sophie eats," Maya said, her voice steady even as her hands shook. "Even when I don't, I keep her safe. That's all that matters. We'll figure it out. We always do." Daniel listened and felt something shift inside him. He'd spent 6 months drowning in his own grief, convinced that his loss was the worst thing that could happen to a person. And it was terrible. Losing Emma had carved a hole in his chest that he didn't think would ever heal. But Maya was fighting a different kind of battle, one where the enemy was hunger and cold, and the daily terror of trying to protect your child with no resources and no safety net. His daughter had died, but she'd died loved, in a warm bed, with parents who could afford every treatment, every comfort. Sophie was alive, but eating her first real meal in who knows how long, like it might be her last. "Where's Sophie's father?" Daniel asked. Maya's jaw tightened. "He doesn't know where we are, and that's how it needs to stay." The unspoken story filled in the gaps. The kind of man you ran from didn't get visitation rights. Sophie, oblivious to the weight of the conversation, was already halfway through her burger chocolate milkshake mustache forming on her upper lip. She was smiling, actually smiling, and something about that smile cracked something open in Daniel's chest. He'd been so focused on what he'd lost that he'd forgotten what he still had. A home, a job, a life that, empty as it felt, was still infinitely more stable than what Maya and Sophie were living. He couldn't bring Emma back. He couldn't fix his marriage. But maybe, just maybe, he could do something that mattered right now, in this moment. "There's a motel near here," Daniel said, the words coming out before he'd fully thought them through. "The Holiday Rest. It's nothing fancy, but it's clean and warm. Let me pay for a room for tonight, for Sophie, so she doesn't have to sleep in a car when it's freezing outside." Maya's head snapped up. "I can't accept that." Emma loved that motel, Daniel continued, and saying his daughter's name out loud to these strangers felt both terrifying and necessary. "My daughter. She thought the pool looked like a kidney bean, and she used to make up stories about kidney bean mermaids. She's gone now, but I think she'd want someone to use a warm bed on a cold night." Maya stared at him, tears streaming down her face now, not even trying to hide them. Sophie looked between the adults, confused but sensing something important was happening. "Just for tonight," Daniel said. "No strings. You can pay it forward someday when you're back on your feet." Maya opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. Finally, she managed 2 words. "Thank you." And Daniel realized, sitting in Emma's favorite booth with these 2 strangers who'd asked for nothing more than a warm place to sit, that this was the first time in 6 months he'd felt something other than grief. It wasn't happiness, not quite, but it was purpose, connection, the sense that maybe his broken heart could still do something useful. After they finished eating, Daniel walked Maya and Sophie out to the parking lot. The November wind had picked up, cutting through their thin jackets like they weren't wearing anything at all. Sophie clutched Mr. Stett. Hoppers tighter, and Maya kept one arm wrapped around her daughter's shoulders, trying to shield her from the cold. Maya's car was parked in the far corner of the lot, a 15-year-old Honda Civic with a dented rear bumper and a crack spreading across the windshield like a spiderweb. When Maya opened the back door, Daniel saw what he'd suspected but hoped wasn't true. The entire back seat was packed with trash bags full of clothes, a few toys scattered among them, a thin blanket folded in the only clear space where a child could lie down. This wasn't just transportation. This was their home. Sophie climbed in without complaint, settling into her spot like it was the most natural thing in the world. She waved at Daniel through the window, still smiling from the burger and milkshake, and the sight of that smile in the midst of this reality made Daniel's chest hurt. Maya stood beside the car, her arms wrapped around herself, not quite meeting his eyes. "The motel," she said quietly. "You really meant that? I really meant that." She was quiet for a long moment, and Daniel could see the war happening behind her eyes. Pride versus necessity. Fear of accepting help versus the bone-deep exhaustion of trying to do everything alone. Finally, she nodded. Just for tonight. The Holiday Rest Motel was a 10-minute drive from the diner, and Daniel followed Maya's Civic the whole way, his headlights illuminating the duct tape holding her rear bumper together. The motel wasn't fancy, just a two-story building with exterior corridors and a kidney bean-shaped pool that was covered for winter. But it was clean and safe, and infinitely better than a car back seat in freezing temperatures. Daniel paid for 3 nights at the front desk, while Maya waited in the car. The desk clerk, a tired-looking man in his 50s, didn't ask questions, just handed over the key to room 208 on the ground floor. When Daniel brought the key to Maya, she stared at it like he'd handed her something precious and fragile. 3 nights? Gives you time to figure out next steps, Daniel said. Make some calls. Look for work. Whatever you need. Maya's face crumbled. She pressed her hand over her mouth, tears spilling down her cheeks, and for a moment she couldn't speak. Sophie was already out of the car, bouncing on her toes with excitement, asking if they really got to stay in a real room with a real bed. "I don't know how to thank you," Maya finally managed. "You don't have to thank me. Just take care of her." Maya nodded, wiping at her eyes with the sleeve of her jacket. Sophie grabbed her hand and pulled her toward room 28, chattering about whether the TV would work and if there might be cartoons. Daniel watched them disappear inside, heard Sophie's squeal of delight echo across the parking lot, and something in his chest that had been clenched tight for 6 months loosened just slightly. He drove home to his empty house and slept better than he had in weeks. 2 days later, Daniel found himself pulling into the Holiday Rest parking lot again. He'd told himself he was just checking in, making sure they were okay, but he'd stopped at the grocery store first, and his trunk was full of food. Bread, peanut butter, cereal, milk, fruit, granola bars. Things that didn't need cooking, that could sustain them past the 3 nights he paid for. He knocked on the door to room 1008, and Maya answered looking exhausted but cleaner. Her hair was washed, her clothes different from what she'd worn at the diner. The shower and washing machine at the motel had clearly been put to use. "Mr. Daniel." Sophie appeared behind her mother, throwing the door open wider. "Mom said you probably weren't coming back, but I knew you would because you're nice." Maya's face flushed. "Sophie, I didn't say that exactly." "It's okay," Daniel said, lifting the grocery bags. "I brought some things. Thought you might need them." Maya stared at the bags, then at him, and he could see her trying to figure out what this was, what he wanted, why he kept helping. He understood the suspicion. In her position, he'd be suspicious too. People didn't usually give without expecting something in return. "I'm not going to hurt you," Daniel said quietly, meeting her eyes. "Either of you. I just want to help." Something in his voice must have convinced her because she stepped back and let him in. The motel room was small but tidy, the bed neatly made, Sophie's few toys arranged carefully on the dresser. The TV was on, playing cartoons, and the heater hummed loudly in the corner. He set the groceries on the small table near the window, and Sophie immediately started exploring the bags, exclaiming over the box of cereal like he'd brought her treasure. Maya stood with her arms crossed, watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "You been out looking for work?" Daniel asked. Maya nodded. "Applied to 6 places yesterday. 3 more this morning. Nothing yet, but I'll keep trying." They talked for a while, Maya gradually relaxing as she realized he really wasn't going to ask for anything. She told him more of her story, filling in the gaps from the diner. She'd been studying to be a nurse before she got pregnant with Sophie. Had to drop out, couldn't afford school and a baby. She'd tried to make it work with Sophie's father, kept believing him when he said he'd change, that the anger was just stress from losing his job, from money being tight. But then one night, he'd grabbed Sophie's arm hard enough to leave bruises, and Maya had known. If she stayed, it would get worse. So she packed what she could while he was passed out drunk, taken her daughter, and run. "I thought I had a plan," Maya said, sitting on the edge of the bed while Sophie munched on an apple. "My friend from high school lives 2 states over, said I could stay with her while I got on my feet. But when I got there, her boyfriend didn't want us around, said he wasn't running a homeless shelter, so we left." "No other family?" "My mom died when I was 16. Dad's been gone since I was a kid. I have a brother somewhere, but we haven't spoken in years." She shrugged, trying to make it seem like it didn't matter, but Daniel could see it did. "It's just me and Sophie. It's always been just us." Daniel found himself talking then, really talking in a way he hadn't since Lauren left. He told Maya about Emma, about the diagnosis that came too late, about 2 years of hospitals and hope and slow inevitable loss, about watching his 7-year-old daughter get weaker and smaller until she barely looked like herself anymore. About the last month in hospice when Emma could barely speak but still tried to smile for him because she didn't want him to be sad. He told Maya about Lauren, about how she'd blamed him for Emma's leukemia, even though blame was meaningless in the face of random genetic mutations, about how his wife had looked at him one morning, 3 months after their daughter's funeral, and said she couldn't do this anymore, couldn't wake up every day and see Emma's ghost in his eyes. About coming home from work to find half the house empty and divorce papers on the kitchen counter. I've been going through the motions since then, Daniel said, staring at his hands. Work, sleep, repeat. Every Thursday I go to Rosie's Diner because it was Emma's favorite place, and I sit in our booth and pretend she's still with me. I know it's not healthy. I know I should pack up her room, move on, find a way to keep living. But I don't know how. Maya listened without judgment, without the pity he'd gotten from everyone else who knew his story. When she spoke, her voice was soft but firm. Emma was lucky. Daniel looked up, surprised. What? She was lucky to have a father who loved her that much, who showed up for her every day, who remembers her, who keeps her alive by loving her even after she's gone. Maya's eyes were bright with unshed tears. Sophie's father doesn't even know where we are. He wouldn't care if he did. We're not people to him. We're just problems that made his life harder. Your grief came from love, Daniel. That's not nothing. The words hit him harder than he expected. He'd spent 6 months thinking his grief was a weakness, a failure to move forward. But Maya was right. It came from love, from being Emma's father, from 2 years of fighting beside her, from choosing to remember rather than forget. They sat in silence for a while. Sophie curled up on the bed watching cartoons, the two adults processing their respective losses in the warm glow of a cheap motel room. Then Daniel did something impulsive, something he'd been thinking about since he'd walked into this room and seen how carefully Maya had arranged their few possessions, how hard she was fighting to keep Sophie safe and normal and loved. My house has 3 bedrooms, he said. Maya looked at him, confused. Emma's room is untouched. I can't go in there, can't pack it up, can't change it, can't even open the door most days. The guest room is empty. I've been living alone in a family home for 6 months, and it's slowly killing me. He took a breath. Move in, both of you. Just temporarily, until you get back on your feet. Maya's eyes went wide. Daniel, we can't. I have a friend, James, who runs a medical supply company. They're always looking for warehouse help and administrative staff. I can make a call. You can work, save money, get stable. Sophie can have a real room, a real bed, consistency. The words were coming faster now, tumbling out before he could second-guess himself. I'm not asking for rent. I'm not asking for anything except maybe some company in a house that's too quiet. And maybe help packing up Emma's room when I'm ready, because I don't think I can do it alone. Maya was shaking her head, tears streaming down her face. Why would you do this? We're strangers. You don't know us. This is crazy. Because someone should have helped you sooner, Daniel said simply. Because Sophie deserves better than a car back seat and motel rooms. Because my daughter's room is empty, and my house is too quiet, and maybe we all need each other right now. Sophie had stopped watching TV. She was staring at Daniel with wide eyes, clutching Mr. Hoppers to her chest. We could really stay at your house? In a real room? Daniel nodded, looking at the little girl. A real room. With a bed and a closet and everything. Sophie turned to her mother. Mom, please, can we say yes? Maya was crying openly now, her hands shaking as she covered her face. Daniel waited, knowing this was huge, knowing he was asking her to trust a stranger with her daughter's safety, with their lives. If their positions were reversed, he'd be terrified too. Finally, Maya lowered her hands and looked at him. If anything feels wrong, if anything happens that makes me uncomfortable, we leave. No questions, no arguments. Agreed. And this is temporary. I get a job, I save money, I find us our own place. Agreed. And you let me help. Cooking, cleaning, whatever needs doing. I'm not a charity case. You're not a charity case, Daniel said. You're someone who needs help. There's a difference. Maya stared at him for a long moment, searching his face for something. Whatever she found must have satisfied her because she nodded, fresh tears spilling over. Okay, yes, thank you. Sophie launched herself at Daniel, wrapping her small arms around his legs so hard he had to grab the edge of the table to steady himself. Thank you, Mr. Daniel. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Daniel looked down at this little girl hugging him like he'd just saved her life, and maybe in a small way he had. He looked at Maya, crying and smiling at the same time, relief and fear and hope all mixed together on her face. And he realized that maybe they were saving him too. 3 months later, Daniel stood in his kitchen making pancakes on a Saturday morning. The radio played softly in the background, some oldies station Maya had found and claimed as hers. Sophie sat at the kitchen table doing homework, occasionally asking questions about multiplication that Daniel answered while flipping pancakes. Maya sat across from her daughter, drinking coffee and reading the newspaper, her hair still damp from a shower, wearing clothes she bought herself with money from her new job at James's medical supply company. The house didn't feel empty anymore, it felt alive. Sophie had claimed the guest room and decorated it with drawings she made at school. Maya had gently helped Daniel pack up some of Emma's things, not erasing her but making space for life to continue. Emma's favorite book still sat on a shelf in the living room. Her photos were still on the walls, but they weren't shrines anymore. They were memories honored without being worshipped. Maya had been saving money, looking at apartments, making plans. She found a place near Sophie's school, a 2-bedroom she could afford with her salary. She'd be moving out in a month, and Daniel was happy for her, proud of how hard she'd worked, how far she'd come. But he'd also missed them terribly. Sophie finished her homework and looked up at him with those wide brown eyes that reminded him less of Emma and more of just Sophie now. Can we go to Rosie's Diner for milkshakes after this? Daniel smiled, sliding pancakes onto plates. Sure, kid. Maya caught his eye across the table and smiled too, the kind of smile that said thank you and I understand and we're going to be okay all at once. The diner booth wasn't a memorial anymore. It was where his new life had begun. The night a stranger's daughter had been brave enough to ask for help, and he'd been brave enough to say yes. Emma's love hadn't ended when she died. It had transformed, teaching him that the greatest way to honor loss was to choose love again, even when it terrified you. Sometimes the family you need isn't the one you planned for. Sometimes healing comes from helping someone else survive. Sometimes a little girl asking if her hungry mother can sit down becomes the beginning of a second chance you never knew you needed. Daniel set the pancakes on the table, and Sophie cheered, and Maya laughed. And somewhere in the warmth of this ordinary Saturday morning, Daniel realized he wasn't just going through the motions anymore. He was living again.